Emily Dawson never imagined walking in on her husband would turn her life into a nightmare of betrayal, obsession, and murder. Rachel always thought of her life as secure, even enviable. She had been married to Daniel for more than a decade, and from the outside their relationship looked flawless. Neighbors saw them as the couple who had everything figured out, the ones who smiled at block parties, kept their house pristine, and seemed to float above the usual troubles that eroded so many other marriages. Rachel herself believed it most of the time. She convinced herself that their occasional arguments were normal, that Daniel's late nights at work were proof of his dedication to his career, and that her own quiet routines kept their household steady. She clung to the idea that she was living in a storybook suburb, even though shadows had begun creeping into the corners of her picture-perfect life. Rachel had left her office job years earlier to spend more time at home, though she often filled her schedule with fitness classes and social gatherings. The gym had become her sanctuary, a place where she could sweat away stress and feel in control of her body when so much else felt uncertain. Marcus, her personal trainer, quickly became a central figure in that routine. He had a way of motivating her without pushing too far, encouraging her with smiles and nods, making her feel capable on days when she wanted to quit. His energy was magnetic, and while she noticed it, she never thought of it as dangerous. He was simply a trainer doing his job, someone she trusted to help her stay disciplined. She often talked about Marcus at home, praising how professional and kind he was, and Daniel never seemed to mind. In her mind, Marcus was a friend, an ally, even a reason she managed to hold herself together during difficult times. Daniel's career took him away more often than she liked. He worked in finance and the hours were brutal. Rachel grew accustomed to eating dinners alone, sometimes sitting in the living room with her plate, scrolling through her phone to distract herself from the empty seat across the table. She longed for their earlier years when Daniel surprised her with flowers or whisked her away on spontaneous weekend trips. Those moments had become rare, replaced by business calls, long commutes, and a silence that seemed to thicken in their house with each passing month. Still, she told herself this was just part of marriage. Love changed, responsibilities piled up, and couples adapted. She would not be like other wives who complained endlessly about being neglected. Instead, she worked harder to keep herself attractive, focused on fitness, and believed that her loyalty would eventually be repaid. On most mornings, Rachel woke early, laced up her sneakers, and drove to the gym. Marcus was usually waiting for her, clipboard in hand, ready with a plan that promised both challenge and encouragement. She trusted him deeply, more than she trusted most people outside her family. Their sessions were intense but structured, and she never once suspected anything inappropriate. When Daniel occasionally asked how the workouts were going, she answered without hesitation, describing how Marcus adjusted her form or encouraged her to add more weight. Daniel would smile, nodding absent-mindedly, his eyes already drifting back to his phone or his laptop. She thought nothing of it, believing her husband simply wasn't interested in gym talk. She could not see the invisible cracks that were slowly widening beneath her feet. Their home, tucked neatly on a tree-lined street, reflected the life she believed they had built together. Framed photographs lined the walls, showing vacations, anniversaries, and parties with friends. Every image told a story of happiness, but Rachel had stopped noticing the way Daniel's smile looked forced in some of the newer pictures. She had stopped questioning why he pulled away so quickly when she tried to hold him, or why he changed the subject whenever she asked about his long hours. She wanted stability so badly that she blinded herself to the warning signs, convincing herself that nothing was wrong. The truth was, Rachel had begun to feel lonely long before the night her world shattered. Loneliness had a way of creeping in quietly, disguising itself as independence. She convinced herself she enjoyed evenings alone, that the silence gave her time to focus on books, workouts, or self-care. But deep down, she longed for Daniel's attention, for reassurance that she was still cherished, still chosen, still loved. That longing made her cling even more tightly to the idea of their perfect marriage. It also made her slow to recognize the subtle changes around her. Daniel had grown secretive in ways that Rachel brushed off. He lingered on his phone longer, turned his screen away when she walked into the room, and began locking his office door while working late at home. When she asked about it, he dismissed her with casual explanations, claiming he had confidential files or was simply focused. Rachel told herself he was right, that she was overthinking, that suspicion would only poison their marriage. She wanted to trust him. Trust was the foundation she believed they had built everything upon. It never crossed her mind that the betrayal would come not only from him, but from the very person she had welcomed into her daily life without hesitation. The days moved forward, ordinary and uneventful on the surface, while underneath, a storm was building. Rachel thought she was safeguarding her marriage by staying faithful, by being supportive, by not questioning Daniel too much. She thought Marcus was simply part of her effort to be healthier, stronger, more disciplined. She didn't see how the connections between the two men had been forming out of sight, how her trust was being twisted into something that would soon destroy her. If anyone had asked her at that time, she would have said she was happy, even blessed. She had a husband with a good job, a home that looked straight out of a magazine, and the discipline to take care of herself. But the reality was fragile, built on secrets she did not yet know. Every smile Daniel gave her, every encouraging word Marcus offered, every routine she thought was keeping her life steady was nothing more than a mask. She lived inside an illusion, and the truth waited just around the corner, sharp enough to cut through everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and safety. And so the stage was set, not with arguments or obvious betrayals, but with quiet trust, blind devotion, and the calm before the chaos. Rachel had no idea that the life she thought was perfect was about to collapse in a single, unforgettable moment. Rachel returned home that evening without warning, her plans with friends having dissolved at the last minute. She felt restless, tired of the constant routines that had lately filled her days with a strange sense of emptiness. Driving back through quiet streets, she thought only of sinking into her couch, maybe pouring a glass of wine, and watching something mindless on television. She parked the car and walked toward the house, the familiar sight of their front porch welcoming her as it always had. But there was something unusual in the air, something she could not put into words. A silence that seemed too heavy, too deliberate. Unlocking the door, she noticed the lights were dimmed, the living room empty, and the faint sound of music drifting from upstairs. Her first thought was that Daniel had finally come home early and perhaps had prepared something for them, a rare gesture she would have treasured. For a brief moment, she even felt excitement stir within her. She climbed the stairs, each step echoing louder than it should have. The music grew clearer, mixed with muffled sounds she couldn't quite identify. The door to the bedroom, the one space she considered theirs alone, was slightly ajar. What she saw when she pushed it open shattered the illusion she had built for years. Daniel was not sitting at his desk working, nor was he surprising her with a romantic evening. Instead, he was with Marcus, the very trainer she trusted, the person she had confided in during her daily workouts. The scene before her was undeniable, a moment so raw and intimate that her mind could not twist it into something else. Her chest tightened, her stomach churned, and a wave of disbelief hit her with such force she felt as though she could not breathe. It was not just the act itself that devastated her. It was the layers of betrayal wrapped around it. Daniel had been lying for months, maybe years, weaving stories about late nights at the office while carrying on a secret life she had never suspected. Marcus had been standing in front of her almost every day, pushing her through workouts, listening to her talk about her marriage, smiling as if he were a trusted friend. Both men had been deceiving her, and both had chosen to do so under her own roof, in the very bed she shared with her husband. She stood frozen, unable to move or make a sound. For a few long seconds, her mind refused to catch up with what her eyes were seeing. Every memory of the past year replayed in a distorted, cruel new light. Daniel's dismissive smiles, Marcus's encouragement, the odd way her husband avoided conversations about her training sessions, all of it suddenly made sense. 1,000 questions collided inside her, but the answers were already there. She had been played for a fool, and the humiliation seared deeper than the betrayal itself. Without a word, Rachel backed away from the doorway. She moved quietly, as if her silence could protect her from the reality that had already crushed her. The walls of the house, once a shelter, now pressed in on her with suffocating weight. She walked down the stairs, her legs trembling, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might give out. When she reached the front door, she left it unlocked behind her and stepped out into the night. The cool air stung her face, but nothing could numb the fire raging inside her. She drove aimlessly for hours, the city lights blurring through her tears. She gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles, her thoughts spiraling between fury and despair. She wanted to scream, to destroy something, to make them both feel the pain she carried in that moment. Instead, she kept driving, mile after mile, until exhaustion finally forced her to pull over on a quiet street. Sitting alone in the car, she felt as if her entire identity had been ripped apart. She was no longer the faithful wife, the trusting client, the woman who believed in her family. She was the victim of a double betrayal that seemed too cruel to be real. The following days passed in a haze. Daniel called her repeatedly, sending messages that went unanswered. Marcus avoided all contact, pretending perhaps that silence would erase what she had seen. Rachel, however, could not escape it. The image replayed in her mind each night when she tried to sleep, a loop of betrayal that stripped away any comfort she once had. Her appetite vanished, her body ached from the tension she carried, and her reflection in the mirror looked more like a stranger with each passing day. She told no one at first. Shame held her tongue, a shame that didn't belong to her but clung to her all the same. The idea of explaining what she had seen felt unbearable. Who would believe her? Who would understand the twisted cruelty of being betrayed, not just by a husband, but also by someone she had trusted with her health, her time, her confidence? She imagined the whispers behind her back, the pitying looks, the stories spreading through her social circle. That humiliation weighed heavier than the loneliness she had once thought was her biggest burden. Rachel began noticing details she had overlooked before. The times Daniel returned home late but looked freshly showered. The moments Marcus canceled their training sessions last minute, claiming other obligations. The way Daniel sometimes scrolled quickly past his phone when she walked into the room. Every small sign she had ignored screamed at her now, mocking her blindness. She realized how easily she had been manipulated, how her trust had been used as a weapon against her. The betrayal was no longer just an event, it became a poison that seeped into everything she touched, every thought she had. At night, when she lay awake, she imagined confronting them both, demanding answers, forcing them to admit what they had done. But even in those fantasies, there was no relief. No explanation could erase the memory of that moment in the bedroom, the violation of her trust. She wanted to believe there was still something left to salvage, that her marriage could somehow be repaired. But each time she considered it, the image burned her again. Some wounds, she realized, cut too deep to ever heal. Rachel began to change. Her quiet routines dissolved into restless wandering. She drove past the gym to see if Marcus was there, though she never went inside. She checked Daniel's calendar, reading meaning into every vague entry. She scrolled through his phone when he left it unattended, hoping to find confirmation, though part of her feared what she might uncover. Her world had narrowed into a tunnel of suspicion, anger, and grief, with no clear way out. The night of discovery had broken something in her. It was not only her marriage that collapsed, but her sense of who she was, of what was safe, of who could be trusted. She had walked into her own home expecting comfort and familiarity, and instead she had found betrayal that would haunt her forever. That single moment marked the beginning of a spiral that would consume her life, pushing her toward a path darker than she could ever have imagined. Rachel's mind no longer worked in the same steady rhythm it once had. Before the night of discovery, her thoughts were organized, her routines predictable, her emotions kept neatly in place. Now they raced wildly, circling around the betrayal until she felt dizzy and hollow. She woke each morning with a pounding heart, as if she had been running in her sleep. The moment she opened her eyes, the memory was waiting for her. She saw it again, the dim light of the bedroom, the music in the background. The figures she had once trusted locked together in a scene that burned itself into her brain. She could not stop replaying it, each replay sharpening the image rather than dulling it. Daniel continued to reach out, pretending to mend what could not be fixed. He sent flowers, left notes, left voicemails with words of apology she refused to hear. Rachel ignored them all, but his persistence only deepened her anger. The very idea of him trying to act like a repentant husband disgusted her. She saw every gesture as false, every word as manipulation, a way to twist the knife further into the wound. Marcus, on the other hand, vanished from her life entirely. He stopped calling, stopped messaging, stopped scheduling her training sessions. The gym where she once felt safe became hostile territory. She could not step through the doors without imagining whispers behind her back, without feeling like every pair of eyes knew her private humiliation. Her loneliness turned to obsession. She began driving routes that took her past Marcus's apartment. At first it was only once, a strange impulse to see where he lived, to connect the man who betrayed her with a place in the real world. But the visits multiplied, turning into a ritual. She learned the car he drove, the patterns of his comings and goings, the times he returned home after late shifts. She sat parked on dark side streets, watching him enter his building, her pulse racing with a mixture of rage and fear. She told herself she wanted answers, but she never approached him. Watching was enough, at least at first. Her thoughts grew darker as the days passed. She felt stripped of dignity, stripped of worth, stripped of the life she thought she owned. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was public, even if no one else knew. It was an attack on her very identity. And with every hour she spent consumed by that truth, her imagination wandered to places it had never dared before. She began to picture Marcus suffering, Daniel begging for forgiveness, both of them finally feeling even a fraction of the pain she carried in silence. These thoughts shocked her at first, and she tried to shake them away, but each time they returned stronger, feeding on her anger like flames fed by oxygen. Rachel's friends noticed the changes in her. She stopped meeting them for coffee, stopped answering messages, stopped laughing at jokes. When she did appear, her face was pale, her eyes restless, her voice sharp. They asked if something was wrong, but she brushed them off with excuses. She could not bring herself to share the truth because speaking it aloud made her feel weak and exposed. In private, she spent long nights pacing her house, staring at old photographs of her and Daniel, burning with the knowledge that every smile had been a lie. She opened drawers, found his shirts, his cologne, his watch, and the smell and touch of them made her shake with fury. She would sometimes take the items and throw them across the room, only to pick them up again in the morning, as if staging small rehearsals for a destruction she knew was coming. Her fixation on Marcus intensified. He became the symbol of everything she had lost, the physical reminder of her humiliation. Daniel, she told herself, was weak, a coward. But Marcus had been inside her trust, welcomed into her world, allowed into her daily routine, only to betray her where it cut deepest. That thought festered until it consumed her. She drove past his building almost every evening, noting when lights came on, when they went out, when his car was missing from the lot. She created timelines in her head, imagined the life he lived beyond her sight. Each detail added fuel to the fire of her hatred. As her obsession grew, her health declined. She slept only in fragments, her body twitching awake with adrenaline that had nowhere to go. She skipped meals, forgetting to eat until dizziness forced her to. Her workout ceased entirely. The gym, once her refuge, was now a battlefield she could not enter without imagining him with Daniel. Instead, she sat in her house, staring at walls, scrolling through social media, hunting for signs of him online. Every photograph of him smiling, every comment from friends praising him, every trace of his normal life felt like an insult. He had stolen her happiness and carried on without remorse. That thought turned her pain into rage and her rage into planning. Rachel began to imagine confronting him. She pictured waiting outside his apartment, following him from the gym, cornering him in a parking lot. She rehearsed speeches in her head, words she would throw at him like knives. But the more she imagined, the less words seemed enough. Words could not erase the betrayal. Words could not make him feel the same depth of destruction she felt every time she closed her eyes. She began to think about actions, real actions, that would force him to understand the gravity of what he had done. The thought of violence crept into her mind slowly, like a shadow growing larger at dusk until it filled every corner of her imagination. One night, unable to sleep, she rummaged through drawers and found a small kitchen knife, one she rarely used. She held it in her hands, testing the weight, running her fingers along the cold edge. She imagined what it would feel like to confront Marcus with it, to finally make him face her pain. The image frightened her, but it also thrilled her, giving her a strange sense of control she had not felt in weeks. For the first time since the betrayal, she felt powerful, even if only in her imagination. She placed the knife back in the drawer but kept returning to it in the nights that followed, as if it were calling her, as if it were waiting to play its role in the storm she was building inside. Rachel told herself she was not a violent person, that she had never hurt anyone before. But betrayal changes people, and the version of herself she once knew was gone. She was no longer the trusting wife, the loyal friend, the dedicated gym-goer. She was something else now, something consumed by darkness, something driven by a need to make the world acknowledge her suffering. The obsession no longer felt optional. It had become her only reality. Each day brought her closer to the moment she would act. She could feel it building, a storm she could neither stop nor escape. Her life had been twisted beyond recognition, and the only path she saw forward was one where Marcus would pay. The thought no longer terrified her. It steadied her, gave her purpose, gave her a reason to wake each morning even when everything else felt empty. She was not the same woman she had been weeks ago. She was sharper, darker, and ready to cross a line she could never uncross. The night Rachel finally decided to act came without much warning, though in truth it had been building inside her for weeks. She had been circling Marcus's apartment like a predator circling prey, always watching, always imagining what she might do if she dared to step closer. But this night was different. Her thoughts no longer wavered between hesitation and rage. They had hardened into a single purpose, a grim certainty that she could not keep living in the shadow of humiliation. She told herself she was taking back control, that what she was about to do was not madness, but justice. She convinced herself that Marcus had stolen her life and that it was only fair to steal something back. She dressed in dark clothes, plain enough to avoid drawing attention, and slipped the small knife from the kitchen drawer into her bag. It felt heavier than she remembered, the weight of it pressing against her side as she drove through the night. Her heart pounded, but instead of fear it was fueled by a strange exhilaration, a sense that something long overdue was finally about to unfold. The streets were quiet, the city hushed in its usual nighttime rhythm, but for Rachel, the silence only sharpened her focus. When she reached the parking lot near Marcus's apartment, she parked at a distance where she could watch without being seen. The lot was dimly lit, with only a few flickering lamps casting pools of light across the cracked asphalt. She saw his car pull in not long after, the familiar vehicle sliding into its usual space. She gripped the steering wheel so tightly her hands ached, watching him step out, casual and unbothered. The very picture of a man who had no idea how much damage he had caused. That sight filled her with renewed fury. How dare he walk so freely? How dare he move on while she remained trapped in the ruins he left behind? Marcus slung a bag over his shoulder and began walking toward the entrance of his building. That was the moment Rachel chose to move. She slipped out of her car, her pulse racing, and followed him across the lot. She had rehearsed this in her mind countless times, but the reality was sharper, louder, each footstep echoing in her ears. She clutched the knife inside her purse, her fingers wrapped so tightly around it that her knuckles turned white. When Marcus reached the doorway, Rachel called out to him, her voice cutting through the silence. He turned, startled, and the recognition on his face shifted quickly to unease. She saw the tension in his eyes, the way his body stiffened, as if he already knew why she was there. Words tumbled out of her, accusations she had held back for weeks, each one sharp and venomous. She demanded to know how he could betray her, how he could use her trust so cruelly. Marcus raised his hands, his lips moving quickly, but she barely heard him. The pounding in her head drowned out everything else. The confrontation escalated fast. Marcus tried to step back, to retreat into the safety of the building, but Rachel moved closer, cornering him against the wall. Her voice rose, her anger spilling out in waves that she could no longer control. She pulled the knife from her purse, the metal glinting under the dim light, and the moment she did, panic flickered across Marcus's face. He tried to push past her, but in the struggle their bodies collided, and her hand, shaking with rage and adrenaline, lashed out. The blade sank deeper than she ever intended. The sound of it tearing through fabric and flesh froze her in place. Marcus gasped, staggered, his bag falling to the ground with a thud. For a moment the world went silent, as if even the night itself was stunned. Rachel stared at the blood that began to bloom across his shirt, a dark stain spreading wider with each second. Her breath caught in her throat, her chest tight, as reality crashed over her. She had crossed the line she only imagined crossing before, and there was no undoing it. Marcus stumbled, trying to stay upright, but his legs gave way, and he collapsed against the wall before sliding down to the ground. The knife slipped from Rachel's trembling hand, clattering onto the pavement. She stepped back, her body shaking violently, her mind screaming for her to run, and then she did. She turned and fled across the lot, her footsteps echoing in frantic bursts. She reached her car, fumbling with the keys, her hands slick with sweat. She forced the engine to start and sped away, leaving behind the sight of Marcus slumped and bleeding in the shadows. Her heart raced as she drove through the empty streets, her hands gripping the wheel with desperate force. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps, and she felt as though the air itself had turned against her, pressing down on her chest. She told herself it wasn't real, that maybe he wasn't badly hurt, that maybe he would survive. But deep inside she knew the truth. She had done the unthinkable, and there was no way to erase it. Rachel returned home in a daze. She stumbled through the front door, her body trembling, her mind fractured. She washed her hands over and over, watching the water swirl red down the drain, though she could never be sure if it was blood or just her imagination. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the knife she had abandoned, replaying the moment again and again. Every second felt like an eternity, each replay heavier than the last. But what she did not know was that she had not been alone in the parking lot. A neighbor walking a dog had seen everything from across the street. The figure of Rachel approaching Marcus, the argument, the flash of metal, and her fleeing the scene, it had all been witnessed. The neighbor called the police immediately, and within minutes, authorities were on the way to the apartment building. By the time they arrived, Marcus was barely clinging to life, the knife wound deep and fatal. The police secured the scene, gathered evidence, and took statements. The description of the attacker left little doubt about her identity. Investigators pieced together the puzzle quickly. Rachel's connection to both Daniel and Marcus was known. Her recent absence from the gym, her erratic behavior noticed by friends, and the witness's account all pointed in the same direction. They traced her car to the area and began building a case that would soon close around her like a trap. Rachel believed she had escaped into the night, but in reality, the walls of her life were closing in faster than she could comprehend. In the days that followed, she tried to act normal, but her paranoia betrayed her. She jumped at every sound, flinched when the phone rang, avoided the gaze of neighbors who seemed to look at her differently. She felt the weight of eyes on her even when no one was there. The guilt and fear consumed her, but beneath it all, there was still a flicker of justification. She told herself Marcus had deserved it, that Daniel's betrayal had driven her to this, that she was not the villain but the victim of a cruel conspiracy. That thought was the only thing that allowed her to keep moving, even as the inevitable closed in. The plan she thought would give her control had instead unraveled completely. The revenge she imagined as a cleansing act had left her drowning in guilt, fear, and the certainty that her life was no longer hers to direct. She had stepped into a storm she could not control, and now there was only one direction left to go downward, into the consequences waiting just beyond the horizon. The quiet suburban street looked calm on the outside, but inside the Dawson home, chaos had reached its peak. Emily stood frozen, her mind replaying the horrific sight of her husband and her trainer tangled together, followed by the trail of destruction that had consumed her family since that night. The whispers from neighbors, the endless questions from investigators, and the gnawing guilt that refused to leave her thoughts had built a storm she could no longer silence. For days she walked in a fog, her body present in the world, but her mind stuck in the moment she had stumbled into that gym. Everything after that had felt like a nightmare spinning further out of control. What began as betrayal had now turned into something darker, something that threatened to consume them all. Michael had tried to explain himself, had tried to paint the affair as a mistake, but the lies he had already told had destroyed any chance of trust. Emily no longer saw him as the man she had married, but as a stranger who had wrecked their life together. She had pushed him away, shutting herself into her own grief, but isolation only gave her thoughts room to fester. She replayed the trainer's smug face in her mind, the way she had looked too comfortable in Michael's arms, as if she had been there all along. The more Emily thought about it, the more she felt the need for answers that no one seemed willing to give her. She started driving by the gym late at night, sitting in her car with the lights off, watching to see if her husband was still sneaking back. Each time she sat there, her pulse quickened with the thought that she might catch them again. The neighborhood soon picked up on the tension. Whispers spread that something was terribly wrong in the Dawson household. Friends stopped calling, unsure of what to say. Even family members grew distant, afraid of getting caught in the drama. Emily began to unravel under the weight of suspicion, convinced that Michael's betrayal wasn't just an affair but part of something deeper. Strange charges on their bank account fed her paranoia, unexplained absences fueled her distrust, and his cold indifference became unbearable. She felt like she was living with a man she no longer recognized. The turning point came late one night when Emily heard noises in the garage. At first, she thought it was the sound of Michael coming home late again, but when she crept downstairs, she realized the light was off and the door was slightly ajar. She stepped inside and noticed things that hadn't been there before: a duffel bag tucked under a tarp, faint traces of dirt smeared on the concrete floor, and a faint metallic smell that unsettled her. When she tried to confront Michael about it the next day, he brushed her off with a calmness that seemed rehearsed. But Emily couldn't shake the image of that bag, heavy and hidden as if it contained something no one should see. Her suspicions escalated when the trainer suddenly vanished. The gym closed for a week, and no one had seen her around town. Rumors spread that she had gone on vacation, but Emily didn't believe it. The last time she had seen the trainer, she had been walking into the gym parking lot with Michael late at night. After that, nothing. It was as if she had disappeared into thin air. Emily reported her concerns to the police, but without concrete evidence, her fears were dismissed as jealousy. Detectives noted her complaint but quietly suspected she was letting her emotions cloud her judgment. Still, Emily couldn't let it go. She began searching through Michael's things while he was at work, determined to uncover the truth. In the back of his closet, she found an envelope with a hotel key card and receipts for cash withdrawals made in small towns outside the city. The discoveries left her shaken. She drove to one of the motels listed on the receipts, and though the staff refused to give her information, she noticed her husband's name in the guest log. Someone else had signed in with him, but the second name was scribbled out. Emily felt her stomach twist. The evidence of betrayal had now shifted into something darker, something that hinted at a secret too heavy to ignore. Weeks turned into months, and Emily grew more isolated, her obsession eating away at her sanity. She couldn't tell if she was uncovering the truth or creating her own nightmare out of broken pieces. Then one evening, the police showed up at her door. They had found something in a wooded area near a hiking trail, shallow grave containing the remains of a woman. Though badly decomposed, certain belongings identified her as the missing trainer. Michael was taken into custody for questioning, but Emily was not relieved. Instead, her mind spiraled with the possibility that she had been living with a killer all along. The trial that followed revealed a chilling sequence of events. The affair had started as a secret escape, but when Emily walked in on them, Michael's world began to collapse. The trainer threatened to expose everything, to tell Emily every detail, and to destroy his career and reputation. In a moment of rage and desperation, Michael silenced her. The duffel bag Emily had seen in the garage had held her belongings before he buried them in the woods. Every detail Emily had suspected was confirmed, but the truth offered no comfort. Emily sat in court, watching as the man she had once loved was painted as a cold-blooded murderer. Neighbors who once pitied her now stared with a mixture of horror and sympathy. Friends who had distanced themselves whispered her name in hushed tones as if she were cursed. She felt as though she had become part of the crime, not just a victim of betrayal, but a witness to its deadly consequences. When the verdict came down, the courtroom was silent. Michael was sentenced to life in prison without parole. For many, justice had been served, but Emily was left hollow. The life she had built was gone, her marriage shattered, her trust destroyed, and her home forever tainted by the memory of what she had seen. She was free from her husband, but trapped in the shadow of his crime. Even after the trial ended, Emily could not escape the haunting image of her husband with the trainer, the secret meetings, the hidden bag in the garage, and the shallow grave in the woods. The betrayal had begun with an affair, but it ended with blood, silence, and ruin. The story spread across news outlets as a cautionary tale, but for Emily it was not a story at all. It was her life, broken and twisted into a nightmare she would never wake from.